adventures, I will be talking about Mary Grant Bruce's A Little Bush Maid, which was first published in 1910. Just a warning that the book contains the race, class and gender themes that you would expect from a book published in 1910. Right, to begin with, here's my 1950s copy that I got from my mother. It's lost its cover. Here is a 2015 edition that I bought just for comparative version purposes. What happens in this book, what happens in this film, first of all. I will talk about what happens in the book and then I will be analysing it. So, what happens in the book? Alright, the scene opens with an introduction to Billabong, which is a large station in Victoria. Nora thought that Billabong was not a place that you needed to praise in any way. It occupied so very modest a position as the loveliest part of the world. Which sounds like hyperbole, but it's not. Billabong is literally paradise on earth. It's always perfect. Nora lives there with her widowed father. She's grown just as the bush wildfires grow. Nora's 11 at this stage, but she has all the skills that she needs. She can sew, cook, ride, muster cattle, run the station, basically. She's very competent. And the book opens when her brother Jim comes back from school. Nora hasn't been away from school. She's just been educated at home. Jim brings two pals with him, Harry and Wally, who are there for the holidays. And they have a variety of interludes. The boys accept Nora as part of the gang because Jim does. They go out for a ride to a fishing hole, and when they're there, Jim tells the others a story about how Nora rescued some sheep during a bushfire. She's kind of embarrassed, so she ambles off. And while she's away, she encounters a hermit who's this swaggy, living in the bush, who doesn't want to meet people. But she and the boys can tell immediately that he's actually a gentleman, not like the normal swagman at all. They have lunch with him, and they leave him alone in the bush with his solitude, which is what he wants. They go back to Billabong. Her father's called away on business, and then Jim also has to leave to go back to school with the boys. And so Nora's on her own. To cheer her up, she and Brownie, the cook, go into town where they pick up the mail. And while they're there, they discover that there is a runaway murderer who is quite a gentlemanly looking person who looks exactly like the hermit. So Nora thinks about whether or not she should tell people that she met this guy in the bush, but she decides no, the hermit she met has eyes that were too kind. It couldn't possibly be him. So she doesn't tell anyone. Then later on, she and her father go into the bush to go fishing, and she goes back to his camp and she finds that the hermit is very ill. He has typhus. I can't remember which one of them. So her father comes and nurses him. It turns out that this guy is a long-lost friend of her father's who had been falsely accused of being a thief and who wasn't. And so he nurses the hermit, and Nora has to ride 15 miles back to Billabong to get help, and then 15 miles back again with the doctor because no one else would be able to find the hidden place where the hermit is. And by an amazing coincidence, the hermit's son is working at Billabong, so he's able to come with them and reassure his father that he always believed in him and that now his name is cleared. And so it's a happy ending, but the hermit survives, and he and his wife and the son are all going to live at Billabong in the future. So that's a lot of stuff that happens in one book, and I've edited out the extraneous. Just to give you some background on how this book came to be, Mary Grant Bruce was working for a magazine, a newspaper called The Leader. She edited the children's corner. She wrote about 300 words of a story for children every week. And so the Billabong, the first of the Billabong books, A Little Bushmaid, came out in The Leader in weekly instalments of about 300 words. There's a charming story that Bruce was too lazy to invent new characters, so she kept having continuing adventures of the same kids. And then she was called into the editor's office and she thought she was going to get into trouble for this. But actually they were like, no, that's great, we want to make it into a book. That's, when you look at the text, that's obviously not what happened, because the stories are clearly marked to be continued. And also 300 words is very little to manage to put into a novel, into even the shortest of short stories. So A Little Bushmaid originally ran from October 1905 to August 1907, and it was printed in 1910 by Ward Locke. Bruce didn't take it to the publishers until she had also finished the next one, Mates at Billabong. So the two of them came out very close together, and actually Mates at Billabong had not finished running in serialised form in The Leader by the time it was available as a book. So you'd either read it a little bit at a time, weekly, or you could get the whole book. And this is 1910. It's, I guess, Bruce's big break. She becomes established as a children's author fairly soon. It's one of the best-selling Australian children's authors. And she continues writing until 1942, including 15 Billabong books. It is important to understand that throughout all of the Billabong books, the Lintons, Nora, her father, Mr. Linton, and Jim, are always right, always kind, and they have almost infinite resources, which they spend rescuing other people mostly. So, in this book, the very first rescue is Nora hauling some prize sheep out of a paddock when there's a bushfire. And it's nice that is where it starts. In literally the very last book, 32 years later, she's rescuing a dog that's fallen in a hole. So there's a nice continuity there. There's also some minor rescues. Jim kills a snake that's threatening Harry. There's a flashback where Jim describes Nora pulling him out of a hole when he was a kid. And there's the major rescue, which is Nora riding 15 miles through the night to get help, and then riding back again with the help so they can find the hermit. And in addition to that, there's another rescue in an interlude that was so terrible that I skipped over it in my description. In one of their adventures, Nora and her father go to a travelling circus, and the lion tamer is attacked by the lioness, and none of the circus people are clever enough to think, oh, maybe we should give her cubs back, and then she maybe will stop mauling this man and take care of the cubs, because apparently they're all morons. So she suggests it, and then it works, and the lion tamer is saved. And it's an episode that's not really attached to the entire rest of the plot. I feel like maybe it was just added because she needed some padding, and because when you write in a magazine form, it doesn't matter if it's a bit episodic. So that is probably the most ridiculous rescue in the entire series, and I would say that as time goes on, they're rescuing bigger and bigger things like the Empire and capturing German subs. But I still think rescuing a lion tamer from a lion is probably the silliest thing that they do. What are some of the things that are great about this book? Well, definitely start by saying there's a lovely sense of humour. The children are realistically prone to teasing each other, even pranking each other. There's this nice bit where the boys fall asleep after a long day, basically at the table, and Nora They're gently awakened by Nora pouring a trickle of water on their peaceful faces. Peace fled at that, and so did Nora. Also, Bruce had very detailed knowledge of station life. Her grandfather owned a station that she had visited frequently, so she has great naturalistic details of what life is like on the land. That I really like. The depiction of Nora. I mean, in a sense, she is a little bit two-dimensional in that she's 11 and she's essentially perfect. She can already do everything that she ever will need to be able to do. She can cook, keep house, sew, although she prefers to knit, ride, muster cattle, take care of stock, take care of everyone. Like, she's essentially got all the skills she's ever going to need. She's kind of perfect, but she's so nicely written and so kind that that you don't mind that she's such a paragon. And also, it's actually quite refreshing that she is treated very much as an equal by Jim and his friends, because in the future, Harry doesn't crop up much, but Wally comes every school holidays and becomes an integral part of the quartet. Here is a photo, I'll put up a scan later as well, from my 1950s edition. It is a picture of them. They're having a race across the plain. Oops. Oh dear, I'll put up a scan. That'd be a lot better. They're having a race across the plain, and it doesn't actually end because Jim falls off his horse. But their assumption of the boys, Harry, Wally, and Jim, is that Nora is going to win because she's the lightest weight and she's got the best pony. So she gets given a quite huge handicap, and as the race is going on, she's about to win, and she is really competing on an even, I guess I was going to say on an even playing ground with the boys. Like, she's certainly perceived as like they're equal and just as likely to win. In fact, more likely to win than the others. And one of the things that I like about Bruce is that she takes the Australian virtue of mateship, but she's consciously making it into something that women and children may also have. So there's this tendency to see mates, which is the Australian ideal, as something that's inherently masculine. It's like men going off and fighting together and being egalitarian together as they fight in overseas wars. But for Bruce, it's mateship is being competent and taking care of other people, and she extends that quality to women and even children, because Nora's not an adult. And I find that really refreshing, very, very enjoyable. Modern editions of Mary Grant Bruce's work have come with what is effectively a spoiler, a warning. A warning. They say, some of Bruce's earlier works are considered to have had offensive and dated content, particularly in regards to racial stereotypes of Australian Aborigines and Chinese and Irish immigrants, and her earlier belief in the theory of social Darwinism. More recent reprints of the Billabong series have been edited to remove controversial material. And that's certainly, I think, a good idea. There's an Aboriginal stockworker called Billy at Billabong, and he is always described in terms of his colour, which is dusky, sable, and his laziness, even though he actually seems to do plenty of work. And it's not questioned that Nora, who's like only a child, is able to give him orders and that he is to follow them. It's the depiction of Billy is one of the really difficult parts of the novel, or all the novels. I will say that this is in 1910. Billy's basically mute and does almost nothing. By the 1930s, he's on stage a lot more. He talks, well, he uses a lot more words, and he talks more, and he's a lot more competent and important to the plot. So there is progress over time. But also, I have to say that race crops up in places where you would not expect race to crop up. I was reading the 50s version, and when Nora and Brownie go into town, into Kunji, the local town, Nora's driving the buggy, and there are two black horses pulling the buggy, and their names are a slur beginning with an N and a slur beginning with a D. I went, oh, right, I wasn't even braced for that. This was not a chapter where there were any Aboriginal people. I was not expecting that I would have to deal with that, and yet there it was. Okay. And I can say, in this version, no, they've been edited out. The horses are called, I don't know, Blackie and Sooty or something. And I'm all for making these changes that make the books readable. Also, in this one, the police come looking for this murderer. They're asking, have you seen this random guy who looks like the hermit? And Brownie, the housekeeper, volunteers the information that she's already asked she's asked the White Hands if they've seen this person, and they haven't. And I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what that means. Does it mean that the White Hands live separately to the black and Chinese workers? Do they have separate housing? They probably do, I suppose. Does it mean that it's inappropriate for her to talk to the black to the black workers? But probably not, because earlier in the book, Billy has breakfast in her kitchen, so they do interact. And I know quite a bit about Australian history, and I've read these books a lot, and I just am baffled by that. Why would she ask only the White Hands and not all the workers if they've seen this person? I don't understand it. And clearly, whoever edited this version didn't understand it either, because that's just been changed, and now she just asked the hands, and none of them had seen anything. So not only are parts of the description racist, they're also often racist in baffling ways that just don't even make sense to modern readers. So I'm all for editing them so that the books continue to have relevance. I just wanted to say a few words about the enormous popularity of Mary Grant Bruce. I've got the copy of Gray's Hollow. It's one of the 20s versions. Unfortunately, as is quite typical, it's lost part of the front illustration. What it's got at the back, though, are a whole lot of ads for other books by Ward Locke. So it's got ads for, let's have a look, a lot of ads, sorry. It's got ads for the Wonder Books, which were annuals. The children will have it. The Wonder Book of Empire, Wonder Book of Animals. Charming Stories for Children. Verses for Children, nursery rhymes. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Robinson Crusoe, Tales from Shakespeare. Now we're getting into things that they actually edited. Popular gift books by Ethel Turner, by Lillian Pike, and by other authors. So Ethel Turner gets the first page of dedicated authors. But Mary Grant Bruce gets the second page, and she's actually got the whole page to herself, unlike Ethel Turner. So she's got Stories by Mary Grant Bruce, and then there's some blurbs. The first is from The Queen, which was a magazine. Mrs. Bruce has a story to tell, and she sets about doing it in her own straightforward way, without resort to padding. Her style is never laboured, it matches its subject with its naturalness, smiles and tears, humour and pathos blend in her books as they do in life itself. And another blurb from the Melbourne Argus. There can be no doubt about the success of Mrs. Bruce. Her effects are obtained in a real natural way that makes them all the more telling. And then we get sort of general blurb for nature books. The Lily series, which are reprints of things like Coral Island and 20 Leagues Under the Sea. The Lily series on the next page. Okay, so we've got reprints of things I've never heard of. Jill the Flower Girl. Oh, Swiss Family Robinson. And on the last page, an ad for a magazine, which is Wardlock magazine. The Windsor magazine, the biggest, brightest and best illustrated monthly. So, Mary Grant Bruce does fairly well in their advertising, and that is because she was one of their best-selling authors, especially from the 1920s onward. When Wardlock had their centenary in the 1950s, she was the senior guest of honour, and that is because she was an incredibly reliable author. Reliable in selling well, and also reliable in that, you know, she always had the right number of pages. She did it to time. She could write to scheme, and I guess publishers appreciate that. So, just a little bit to let you know how much Wardlock, valued her and how prominent the advertising for her was. I really like it. It is one of the weaker Bruces because it is much more episodic than the later books. I think she's still working out how to plot. So, for instance, she could have left the entire ridiculous circus interlude out of it. It would have made no difference. The characters are very clear. They don't really change at all, actually, over time. They just come into closer focus. And they don't need to change over time. They're competent and kind. That's what they are. And competence and kindness are central to her concept of mateship. So she opens that up so that women, children can be mates as well as men, and I really appreciate that. Another thing about novels I really appreciate is the really loving and faithful descriptions of station work. The one area where the novels are pretty problematic to modern readers is the issue of race.